It's not the strong or the smart that survive, but those who can respond to change. And we're changing very fast right now. The very planet is changing faster than we ever thought possible. So this is an unusual time for business, but change brings opportunity. And those who can take advantage of it will win. So what's going on? I spent 2-3 years talking to companies to try to understand what are they doing. These are the big companies I spoke to. I spoke to some smaller ones as well. The point was to understand what are they doing to try to green their operations, what's working and what's not working. Because there had been a lot of discussion for years about win-win. It's always easy. You always make money. Well, that's not really believable. There's definitely some challenges, and I'll touch on a couple of them later. But a theme came out throughout my interviews, which was innovation. I think that's a big part of the conversation today, innovation. So change and innovation, just look for those two things as I talk. So what's going on in the world? Why are companies going green? What's the pressure? Well, this is a green wave, as I call it, of two main forces. One is just the natural world. We're seeing real resource constraints. It's not what we used to think. It's not running out of things necessarily, but we're running out of stable climate as a resource. And people are feeling the constraint on water around the world, as your industry knows better than most. There's parts of the world where it's a real constraint. The second big force is stakeholders, and that's this very fancy word for you and me in different walks of life, as employees, as customers, as family members, as members of NGOs, as government regulators. Those are people too. All people asking tough questions, asking business how they're handling environmental and social issues. And those questions are getting louder and more diverse and powerful. So what are the big environmental problems? I'll just speed through a few. There's sort of a top 10 in the book. Water, quality and quantity. Questions about where we're going to get our energy from. And these are the two most controversial, and I think ones we're going to see a lot more of. Biodiversity, loss of life, the species, the web of life that we're all a part of. Toxics in the environment, in our bodies, and in our children's bodies. I have two small kids. They're not this big, but they're a little bit bigger. And you start to think about this stuff a lot more when you have kids. And then the big one, of course, of the top 5 is climate change. And it's the one driving all the others. It's really making all of them more severe. There's 5 others that we talk about in the book as part of the story of the sort of big 10: deforestation, oceans and fisheries, waste management, ozone, which is still a problem in some parts of the world, and air pollution. Now, every industry and every business has a slightly different list, but this is roughly the 10 that society and business have to deal with. And companies around the world are now realizing they have to systematically ask themselves how they impact these issues, how they're impacted by them throughout their value chain, in their supply chain, in their customers. Now, is the science crystal clear? Do we know everything we need to know about these things? Some say this stuff is dangerous. Some say it isn't. The problem is we're often in this car, and a lot of the audiences I speak to are in the truck. So what do? How do we decide what's real? And the only thing we really can go on is consensus, scientific consensus. And on one of these environmental issues, the consensus has clearly gotten very clear. Global warming is unequivocal. This was the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on February 2nd, sort of a very important day in the greening discussion in the world and the greening of business discussion, a monumental day, and I'll get a little later to another reason that day was really important. Now, does anybody here have a science degree? Engineering? Some people scientists? Have any of you used the word unequivocal before in a report? And I ask people in business, have you said to your bosses, I'm unequivocally going to hit my targets next year? Unequivocally. Think about that. It's a really aggressive word, and thousands of scientists agreed to this. But the other thing that's happened is the scientists have said repeatedly, and this was just a month after this report, they said things are happening faster than we expected. And that statement has come out almost every month since then. Something, and lately it's the Arctic, right? There's something happening faster than we thought. So that's scary, obviously. But what's interesting to me is that this is the scientific community. The business community was already there. Big pockets of the business community was already there, at least on climate change. We take the position that the debate is over. We need to do something about greenhouse gases. Now, this sounds like it would be Patagonia or someone with a green focus, but it was actually Shell Oil, the U.S. president of Shell Oil. Really one of the first times that a U.S. oil company was saying something like this. This was almost a year ago, before the science got clear. But there's been even more interesting pockets of the business community that I find really entertaining. The planet deserves the benefit of the doubt. Sounds like Greenpeace. This was actually Rupert Murdoch. Now, I don't know if he told all his networks about this yet. He's working on it. But actually, that's sort of an old joke now because he has. Fox Networks have said they're going to be climate neutral. That's what they've declared. It's a pretty big deal. So the typical critics, as you might expect, of the climate change debate are sort of falling. And there's not much left. It's becoming clear that we all are going to have to do something about this. So the environmental issues are not crystal clear, but there's some big ones, and we know climate change is one of them. So the second part of the green wave is stakeholders. All these different groups. And, the simplistic view in the past was just, you had to worry about competitors. You go to business school, you hear about 4 or 5 major forces, Porter's 5 forces. But the real world is much more complicated now, especially on environmental and social things. And there's 20 groups that we list in the book, and I won't go through them all, and you probably can't read them all in the back. But the point is, again, that companies are finding they need to systematically think through them all and ask, what do these groups want from us? What are they asking? And do we have the answers? Do we even know the answers? So I'm going to touch on the 5 groups that are in the middle circle, the big circle there, really briefly. Well, first you have the rule makers and watchdogs. And this is the group that everybody's always known about and the one we've probably thought of as the major stakeholders. NGOs, the government, politicians. And they're still very strong. They're still continuing to set aggressive regulations around the world. But something's changed dramatically in the last 5-10 years. And it used to be about federal regulations, pretty much. But now you've got things happening at the supranational level, bigger than countries, the EU directives on chemicals and REACH, on waste, on electronics, and things at the global level, Kyoto Protocol and other discussions. But then in a more interesting way in our setting in the US is you got things happening at the smaller level, down at the state and city level. And this was a fun cover of Time a couple months ago with the governor and the mayor of New York City. Interesting pairing. And in the article, they quoted Warren Buffett, who said this would make a really interesting independent presidential ticket. He wasn't kidding, because apparently he checked the Constitution, and Schwarzenegger can run for VP. So that we should all think about that as we're in California, what that means for us. But this article was about a lot of the environmental things these guys are doing. A lot of things are doing with social issues, but environmental was one of the big ones, and setting their own regulations. And cities around the country are setting their own Kyoto Protocol goals for their city. So that means just hundreds of different pressures and regulations for companies. And the second big group are the idea generators, the agenda setters. These are think tanks, academia, that are coming up with ideas, but the group that really filters it is the media. And the media sort of decides what the agenda is and what the big issues are. And the media coverage on green has been relentless this year, as you've probably seen. And these are some covers on the green business side. You've got BusinessWeek, you've got Fortune, 2 covers in a year, you've got New York Times. This is an article I picked up in Shanghai. I was there for a few days. The Shanghai Daily had 3 stories that were basically green business stories. This is a global phenomenon. The Journal a few weeks ago did a whole thing on how companies are cutting costs and reducing energy use. Business 2.0 earlier this year, go green, get rich. This was the subtle approach. I love that. And then we started to see it in other walks of life. Town and Country, Vanity Fair, there's the governor again. Popular Science, how do we engineer this new world we're trying to get to? And then my favorite from the spring, Sports Illustrated. Anybody see this series of articles? As the planet changes, so do the games we play. An article about how climate change was affecting sports. And it showed a picture of Florida and showed the waters rising over the next 100 years and showed stadiums all along the coast of Florida and showed how they'd be underwater. And I found this pretty amusing because I thought, if the waters do rise, the loss of the Orange Bowl is not our biggest problem. We have a few other issues to deal with, like the loss of Miami and New Orleans. But what's important here is that, imagine you pick up your Sports Illustrated, at your mailbox, and you're just trying to have a relaxing day, and now you're being told that sports are being ruined by this climate change thing. The point is, it's reaching everybody. This media coverage over the last 8 months has been hitting everybody in different parts of their life. You can't get away from it. So the typical American thinks of the environment as a pretty critical issue now. It's not up with terrorism and maybe healthcare, but it's now not 10th. It's now in the 3, 4, 5 range of important issues. That's a pretty big jump. The third big group is the business community. And this is the group that I spend the most time on, where my work is on and what my book is really for and about. And the business community has been really interesting over the last year, how much it started to pressure itself. This is a list of some eco-fringe radical companies that all got together in January and formed the Climate Action Partnership. This was a group that went to Washington and said, we want a cap on carbon. We want to reduce emissions. Asked for federal regulation on this. But look at these companies. These are companies that use a lot of energy. So a cap on carbon is going to cost them more money. So why would they do this? Well, you got DuPont. They've cut their greenhouse gases 72% in the last 15 years. So they're in pretty good shape competitively. BP talks about being beyond petroleum. GE's trying to sell a lot of eco-imagination products. My favorite in here, though, is Alcoa. Now, aluminum is the most energy-intensive product known to man. And if you raise the cost of energy, which is what a cap does, it will cost them money. But if you think about it, if you want to cap emissions, one of the best ways to do that is to reduce emissions in the transportation sector. And one of the best ways to do that is to make vehicles lighter. And one of the best ways to do that is to put more aluminum in them. Okay, so think about that. This is value chain thinking again. They go, wow, in our own operations, our costs are going to go up, probably a lot. But we're going to sell so much more of our stuff that it's good for our business. And we want to be involved in setting those regulations so it works for us. That's very smart green to gold thinking right there.